Thank you to that person. Thank you everyone else in the audience for joining us for this panel. And this is going to be a good one, I promise you. So, you're not sitting in headshot order, it doesn't matter, you can join the dots. We have an illustrious panel before us. We're here to talk about breaking new ground in connected TV. I'm Omar Oakes, I'm the media leader. And so, what is this panel all about? We're going to fly across different areas of connected TV to get to the heart of what advertisers, publishers are looking for. How do we measure connected TV? What's possible and not possible? What we need going forward? Getting into what media buyers are thinking about or worrying about when it comes to being in ad breaks for connected TV. I also want to explore ad formats and conventions we see in traditional TV and how we replicate that or not replicate that in connected TV. And if there's time, we might get into a bit of Netflix, Disney+, sports. There's a lot there already. First, very importantly, how do we know someone is actually in the room when we're measuring connected TV? I want to ask about co-viewing. Chris, you're already smiling and nodding. You're keen to answer this. Chris and Rakuten, how do we measure this?
Yeah, well, co-viewing has been quite important to us. I mean, when we took the free-to-view service to market, we was really keen to understand how the user was watching the content. So we did a number of studies into co-viewing, and across Europe established that about 3/4 of the audience are watching with at least one other person. So that became quite key and has certainly been part of the commentary of us exploring that further. Does it increase engagement if there's more than one person in the room? And pieces of research that we've done is established it has, because it can create discussion points. It can also increase higher levels of engagement in the creative. So it's been the forefront of what we've been talking when going to market, talking about the household as opposed to the individual, because it's the biggest screen in the household.
Okay. Graeme from Sky Media, I'd like to bring you in. Obviously, Sky has announced a lot of things this year in terms of you've just launched a streaming stick. Sky Glass, the new television, has been around for a while. So has this enabled you to better measure so-called co-viewing, or how have you been doing that up to this point? And maybe give us an insight what you could be doing going forward.
Yes, I suppose the stock answer from a broadcast would be we rely very heavily on Barb. You know, all of our measurement is very much focused around kind of how do we support a standardized system that kind of, you know, everyone can sit on and kind of benefit from. So that'd be our first port of call. New products like Stream and like Glass will in the fullness of time give us opportunities to actually be able to kind of understand how many people are in a room. But for the time being, it's very much based around, you know, what Barb says around kind of how many people are viewing at any one time. And beyond that, I suppose we get into the kind of into the realms of, you know, how response, you know, looking at response from advertising campaigns and seeing, look, there's clearly kind of multiple people kind of responding from one place.
And just briefly, is anything surprising you about the data that you're seeing with these new customers coming on Sky Glass? But it's too early for the stick.
Not really, to be honest. I mean, I think not to veer off into kind of different territory, but I guess some of the learnings we're finding around the sort of homepage. So when you first go into a Sky Glass kind of ecosystem, you're faced with a slightly different kind of setup than say Sky Q. We're obviously trying to make sure that they're as kind of comparable and as alike as possible. But certainly, if you put kind of loads of kind of glossy tiles up in front of a viewer, they're more likely to engage with the tiles than necessarily go into what we'd known as a kind of traditional kind of broadcast experience, where you're kind of a click away from live TV. But yeah, outside of that, it's fairly kind of, we're learning a lot as we go around kind of what viewers are doing when they're faced with a slightly different kind of homepage.
Okay. Just remind the audience, we do have people with microphones on the sides. If you do have a question, I'll try and, with about 10 minutes left, I'll try and ask. Just raise your hand. The light's very bright, so you have to really go for it. Dean from Deliveroo. So from the advertiser side, given what you've just heard from two platforms, media owners, in terms of how we measure co-viewing, does this satisfy you? Maybe give it a mark out of 10. What more do you want actually from media owners, platforms, in order to give you the connected TV advertising measurement data you want?
I don't think I'll mark your work on stage. I think that'd be ever so slightly rude. But I think as a technology business and a marketing team within a technology business, we often get asked like how we measure in our TV and what's the effectiveness, and that always would be the long-term investment and how that's having an impact on our brand, but also the short-term impact. And I think the way that we would perceive that is that when we work with the likes of Channel 4 or ITV on their data matching products, and what we're able to do is run lift tests and get a really good understanding of, well, if we've served this person an ad and this person hasn't seen an ad, what the relative lift is. And then obviously if you're seeing an ad and there's an action that happens from a short-term impact perspective, then we can perceive that they've seen that ad and there's been an action. So we're always looking at different ways to experiment and working with our broadcasters and our partners and our agencies directly to work out what are the right experiments we should be running that give us those answers. And then using that to then, okay, well, what's the next iteration of that and the next iteration of that? So constantly testing things alongside our media mix modeling to understand, well, what is the true impact if someone is or is not seeing our ads?
And has that become easier at all, or is it even more difficult? We've heard so much in the last couple of days about media fragmentation, test and learn. Is it getting any easier?
It is getting easier. I was using an example earlier about how actually you can do that with Channel 4 and ITV, but actually you can't do that with Google. Maybe slightly brave to sit on stage and be negative about Google, but hey-ho, we're doing it anyway.
Sorry, just for anyone who's not clear, what do you mean you can't do it?
Yeah, so a really good example is if I serve an ad on a connected TV and that's a logged-in environment and I'm able to match that data of that consumer from my consumer set with a broadcaster or a walled garden, we're then able to understand whether that ad was exposed and whether an action actually happened. For example, my understanding right now is that if I was to buy that ad on YouTube and then that person performed an action on their phone, that ecosystem doesn't currently allow for that same level of measurement. So it's really interesting when you think about the way the ecosystem has changed, that previously you'd have said that Google or YouTube for a certain point is far more advanced in that space, where actually I'd say the broadcasters have caught them up and have maybe even overtaken them to a certain point in that specific use case.
That's quite interesting you bring up YouTube, because I don't want to get into the debate whether that's TV, but it's interesting that you're thinking about that within your TV budget and your TV spend. Paul from Publica, I mean, that's an interesting example of kind of how a brand is thinking about this. We think about the ad break, for example.
Yeah.
Connected TV, different BVOD, SVOD, AVOD formats. How are we seeing anything different in terms of how publishers are building their ad breaks for advertisers?
I think if you're a smart streaming publisher today, the way you're thinking about your ad break is trying not only to just attract traditional TV ad budgets, but it's also how do you attract digital and social ad budgets as well. So in traditional TV ad buying, it's been very easy to understand the context of the show in which you're going to advertise around. It's been very easy to understand the position within the ad break in which your ad is going to appear. But in CTV, thus far, it's been quite difficult for advertisers to really get that level of insight and understanding around what's happening within CTV ad breaks. So ad servers like Publica exist today to help streaming publishers really construct ad breaks and not only enable those on the buy side to have transparency and controls, but also to attract digital and social advertisers so they can understand things like context, content parameters, position with an ad break, whether or not they're going to run back-to-back with their competitors. They're the types of things that we're seeing publishers really thinking about today when they're building out their yield strategies when it comes to building intelligent ad pods that they can monetize either directly or via programmatic channels.
Okay. Lolly to my left from Peach, I mean, so your business is all about trying to make digital advertising work as well as broadcast advertising has. So in the midst of all of this conversation, what about the user experience?
Yeah.
We've also heard a lot in the last couple of days about how important creative still is. Was it Kelly Williams from ITV yesterday said that we need to compete really hard on content, but collaborate on technology. So I've not heard a lot yet about the user experience.
Yes.
So
yeah.
is this something that tends to get forgotten about? It's partly due to my questioning, but is it something that we need to be mindful of, and kind of where are the pitfalls?
Yeah, I think it's easy as an industry to sort of focus on how we do things in a way that's better for us and sort of make life easy and get excited around the sort of opportunities around audience targeting and so forth. And this happens certainly in digital media, kind of in the earlier 2000s, where we got very excited about capabilities, but didn't think so much about the actual user experience. As a result, ad blocking, etc., went up, and it started to affect business models. I think something we can do that will help the move, I think, will also help to sort of win budget over, perhaps, for some of the CTV players from traditional broadcast, is to start to ensure that we do keep the user experience at the forefront of whatever we're doing, and also maintain the same sort of trusted experience as in broadcast in a CT environment. So there are, for decades within broadcast, there's been a very strong focus on quality and checks and balances. There's been a very rigorous approach to ensuring creatives are properly QC'd, that the creatives have gone through regulators, etc. It's very rare within broadcast to see something like multiple ads accidentally in an ad break, or an ad that has the audio slightly off sync, or the ad, as I saw quite recently, gets chopped off before it's finished in an ad break. Whereas I've seen all of those three things just within the past week on a few occasions on CTV. So I think if we bring the same rigour into the CTV environment, that'll start to give brands the confidence to invest more and start to put a little bit more focus on some of the newer media owners.
That sounds great, but quite expensive. Are we able to do this? Is this paradigm that Lolly's talking about, are we able to do this?
Yeah, well, certainly there are several CTV ad servers today that can absolutely give those controls to streaming publishers. So again, if you knock on Dean's door and you say, Dean, I want you to advertise in my CTV app, but I can't tell you the context of the show, I can't tell you the position, I can't give you any type of audience data, you can't measure it. You'd say, go away, Paul. I've been able to do that in traditional TV advertising for the last 30 years. Why would you expect me now to advertise in CTV if you can't even give me the same basic understanding of where my ad is going to appear? So lots of technology companies have spent the last several years trying to bring the controls of traditional TV to addressable TV, but also the precision of digital targeting. So it's now this hybrid world where streaming publishers can go into agencies and brands and say, look, you can do everything you've been doing on traditional broadcast, but in CTV, but you can also now start to apply some of the digital targeting that's worked so well for you in other channels, but on the biggest screen in the household. So to answer your question, yes, it is possible today, but you have to be working with technology companies that have been built from the ground up around the nuances of streaming and television. The technology is very different from display technology. It's very different from video technology. So again, you have to make sure that you're working with a CTV first partner.
Yeah. And it's not necessarily expensive. It's just around building that into everything you do from the start. If we go down the wrong route now and start sort of chucking sort of quality, regulatory focus, etc., to one side, it's going to be much harder to bring things back later. So if we build things up well now and get the right workflows in place, I think we'll all benefit.
Okay. What do you think it's going to mean for connected TV once these programmatic systems we've just been talking about, once you can guarantee first in ad break, or maybe last in ad break as well? How are you going to do things like contextual-based targeting, competitive separation, same categories of advertisers, keeping them at a distance? Lolly?
Well, I think this is a very good step towards starting to replicate the sort of broadcast type experience in a programmatic environment. There are still some issues at the moment. We've noticed with, so we deal with a combination of kind of post-production, brands, broadcaster side to kind of help ease creative workflows. But for the first time, we've started to see the sort of production side, brand side start to get confused, for instance, about exactly where creative's meant to go, what the workflow is, who's managing what. We had a quick green room chat around kind of programmatic creatives being sent directly to a media owner, etc. as well. So I think in addition to improving the actual ad experience, I think we also need to do something about kind of easing the pipes as well. I think budget will come over if it's easy to add, say, an extra broadcaster onto a broadcast media plan. It's suddenly a whole lot more complicated to work out if you want to say but media on Pluto. It's like, is it through this DSP or that one? Is it direct? Is it through Sky? So I think if we make life easier on that front, as well as enhancing the actual ad experience, we can make great strides.
Okay. What I thought was interesting, if anyone caught the interview with Netflix head of ad sales, Jeremy Gorman, yesterday, she was talking about, for the moment, we're going to do standard 40-second, 30-second, 20-second, 10-second formats. but in the future they're going to look at maybe doing something different depending on how innovative they can be. Chris, I mean, what do advertisers actually want in this space, and how creative do you think they're willing to be going forward?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, because we're getting demand from the clients and we're being agile enough to sort of react to that demand, and one of them has been to adapt to different ad durations. So whereas the 30-second used to be the standard, the norm, which we build the ad pods on that set, the demand now is more for 10 seconds. Now, whether that's because of the attention measurement, which is obviously a big topic of discussion at the moment, but we've adapted to that, and we're seeing far greater volume of the shorter duration ads in this space to adapt to the KPIs of the creative. Whether it's rotation of 10 seconds or whether it's individual pieces of creative. It's where the demand is at the moment. I'm sure that will continue, but we adapt as and when that demand changes.
So is that going to be an added consideration? I mentioned competitive separation, kind of not having the same groups of advertisers clustered together in an ad break. If it's just 10-second ad, 10-second ad, 10-second ad, 10-second ad, kind of how much do advertisers care, Dean? What's your experience of this? How much would that concern you, for example?
And what you've described is in the Italian marketplace, right, where they have these same ad breaks, but lots of shorter ad breaks, and they bundle it together. I mean, Netflix have hit a really good nail on the head there, which is there's lots of different things that advertisers want to do. And if we're thinking about the different levels of audiences and segmentations that can be done, not just in Netflix, but in other partners, where we could just do like our strategic reach and frequency based on our core audiences, or we can look at Axiom segments, for example, or we can look at our own first-party data and model that out. We might then want to think about, well, that's one set, that one audience is a 10-second nudge or a 6-second bumper, or actually if we're trying to build a brand with a new consumer set, that might be a 30-second. So actually, you start to got all these different strings to your bow to be like, well, actually, if I start to combine these different attributes together, then actually I can have a bit more storytelling in the consumers that I'm trying to attract. So actually, it's not about just, well, I want to do a 30 because I'm doing this. You then need to think from a production perspective, well, what are the jobs that need to be done across all of my business goals, and how am I going to interact with my consumers through AV in that manner? So I like the fact that Netflix and other partners are starting to think about that, where actually it's not just going to be a 30-second because I can afford it, or a 10-second because of inflation. It's actually going to be different things that as a brand I need to achieve, and there's different audiences behind that. And they're giving us the tools to do that, which I think is really exciting.
Paul, do you think it's important for connected TV to replicate what we had with traditional linear, or if Netflix were to go off in a very different direction, just for argument's sake, maybe that wouldn't be the way to go?
Not necessarily. Television is still television. We haven't, it's not a new invention that we've suddenly discovered. It's still the biggest screen in the household, but the way the content reaches the viewer, that's changed. The plumbing, the mechanics behind the scenes. And with that has brought a lot of opportunity to advertisers. Again, the data, the technology, the programmatic tools to really start drilling into targeting, understanding how your TV advertising is working, using data from your TV campaigns to inform other parts of your marketing strategy. So I think we've got the best of traditional TV, again, with all of the precision and granularity that digital has been delivering to marketeers for the last 10 or 15 years. So we're not reinventing the wheel. TV is still very much television. Again, it's just the back-end mechanics are changing. And that's not only good for viewers, because it means they can discover more content organically. It's very, very good for marketeers because they've got much more controls around how their TV ad budgets are actually working.
You say you're not reinventing the wheel, but Sky, for example, I can pick on you, Graeme. You're announcing lots of interesting things in terms of, I think this week it was skip ad. You'll be able to pay to skip ads in future. I mean, is that kind of cognizant of the advertising experience has changed and you need to offer different things? I think a lot of people might have regarded that with surprise that you do that.
Yeah, so there's no official launch of that or anything quite yet, but I think on the general point of just kind of trying to evolve and move us forward, of course we're kind of looking at all kinds of things, so whether that's kind of using first-party data, we've been doing that for years, whether it's about pushing into kind of shoppable, we've started kind of working out how could you streamline the path to purchase for some like Dean's brand, is kind of transaction on the big screen actually where it's going to go, or is it because it's always going to be companion app? What do you need to do to the creative to make it, incite slightly more response? All those sorts of things are kind of areas that we'll push into. I think the main thing for everyone, and especially Dean and brands like Dean's, we need to be kind of standardised in the way that we do it. Of course, we need to kind of test all of these different ways of doing stuff, but we need a trusted ecosystem that everyone kind of understands the rules, understands what they need to kind of do from a regulation perspective, and really start to kind of understand how you can kind of deliver at scale across all of these new platforms.
We've got just under 10 minutes left. Does anyone have a question for the panel based on anything you've heard or not heard? One thing you're not allowed to ask is what's for lunch. That'll be a surprise for everyone later. If you do have a question, please wave. Someone will hand you a microphone. Let's talk about sport. Sport is obviously, when we talk about linear, programmatic, live sports and news, is obviously the thing that people are still watching live. But in terms of how we measure that in connected TV, I mean, again, great, sport is hugely important to Sky. How many people are actually watching it on digital platforms, and how are you measuring that? It's going to be interesting to see with ITVX, how many people have been watching the World Cup on ITVX, well at work maybe, versus on TV, on traditional TV. How are you measuring that, and how is it changing?
So it all sits behind that kind of Barb kind of set of standards. So it's very much we've kind of basically transitioned everything we possibly could from a standardized and trusted framework in kind of linear into all of these new platforms. Sports, one of those unique bits of content that, as you say, needs to be what's live. I think something like 90%. If you look at all the different channels across Sky, you can get something like Atlantic. Probably only 10% of it is what's live, and then you go to another channel like a Sky Sports, and probably 90% of it's live. That's very much the case in these new kind of CTV and kind of digital platforms where people need to see it straight away. And equally, we need to get the advertising experience right. So Paul referenced all these kind of precision ways of being able to target across these new ecosystems is very important. Typically what we'll find is advertisers like the idea of they'll pay slightly kind of premium rates for being around sport, but they want mass. So they don't necessarily want to target very niche audiences across sport. They want to kind of be there in front of the World Cup, in front of the Premier League, and hit as much audience as possible.
Timing crucial as well. I mean, Dean from Delivery. I mean, you've had England footballers in your advertising. Not so long ago. Obviously, for you and other quick service delivery, last mile companies, live sport's incredibly important. Are you getting what you need in terms of the data, in terms of your ad campaigns with connected TV?
I mean, to think about the live sports example, I was actually given an example. I was actually given a presentation internally about content consumption. And the last time there was, I think, 20 million people watching the same programme in the UK was the Only Fools and Horses Christmas special. And I was presenting this to a group of 20-year-olds who didn't know what Only Fools and Horses was. So that was slightly concerning.
Explain it now.
No, I don't think I'll be able to. And I think what's really interesting is that there probably is still, and we used the last Euros final of the World Cup, there probably was still 20 million people watching that programme, watching that game, but in different places. And I think what that actually allows you to do is to really understand the different type of audiences, the devices they use to consume that content, and what value that brings. So I think that's what's really interesting, and it's going to be interesting to understand how those, like the DAZNs, for example, how those platforms start to scale and offer the different targeting and the different ways of working that brands are going to start to want, whether that's integrated sponsorships or whether that is badging or whether that's different ad breaks. Or I think there's actually real value in there that I don't think anyone's really started to explore yet, and it's going to get really exciting as sport goes more into that space and different rights gets sucked up, and we get to see more sport in those environments.
Do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing? Because I can see a pretty near future, in which we start to see Apple, Amazon, Netflix start competing for Premier League rights. We're seeing more American ownership in the Premier League in particular, where they have a history of dealing with franchises, and even in the NFL, for example, they are media owners in their own right to an extent. And do you think this is broadly a good thing or a bad thing I'm not going to ask Graeme from Sky, who might think it's a bad thing.
I mean, I'm happy to take that one, I think. And we discussed this a little bit earlier, which is, as the ecosystem for TV and content becomes more expanded and sort of slightly chaotic, if planners don't have the right tools to understand where these audiences are going to exist, and we have a fragmented, I mean, even football, if it's on Amazon, if it's on BBC for the highlights, it's on Sky, it's on BT. I mean, it could be on DAZN if it's one of the Serie A. Like, that audience is consuming all these places, but actually, if you've only got reach curves of 3 of those channels, like, how are you supposed to plan against that? Mm-hmm. So actually, it becomes a question of, well, how do we make sure that those planners have the right tools to buy the right audiences for the brands that are trying to buy these certain consumer sets? So actually, I think there's a job to be done in understanding, well, if we fragment content, then we need to be able to make sure that the people who are buying those ad breaks have the tools and the data available to them to make the right decisions for their clients.
Okay. We've only got a few minutes left, so quick fire round. I promised a bit of chat on Netflix and Disney. So, hope you'll all stay tuned for the Disney interview after lunch. But before we get into that, how much of a game changer do you think it's going to be now that they've got their ad-funded tiers? I'm just going to go in a line.
Yes. I think very big for a few reasons. One is tipping point in terms of volumes into CTV outside of BVOD for the first time, which should obviously bring budgets, innovation. The other thing is they've chosen, for I think the first time of any new sort of broadcast streamer I've seen, they've gone straight for programmatic first approach. They've also gone with a global sales house. So they're set up to properly scale across all regions. They've also broken out of standard broadcast regulatory bodies, etc. So I think they've set themselves up to work in a truly scalable way globally. They're doing things a little bit differently. They may set a path, or they might kind of break things and set back a bit, but we don't think so. It looks like they're doing the right things so far, and it'll be interesting to see how that changes the way other media owners are working.
So game changer marks out of 10?
Yeah, game changer. Out of 10, 8.
8.
8 to 9.
Graeme?
Yeah, a good market's a competitive one. I'm Captain Boring today. I'd say it just needs to be kind of standardised so that, Dean and all those brands can kind of use it in a really kind of trusted way. Do I have to score it as well?
Yes.
5.
Okay.
I think they're making all the right moves. It's really, really interesting to see that they've adopted Barb. They haven't been drawn into the measurement debate of panels versus impressions. Straight off the bat, they've looked at the currency of choice for TV ad buyers in the UK, which is Barb today, and they've adopted it. That enables them to capture traditional TV ad budgets. They've also adopted third-party digital measurement from companies like Integral Ad Science. That also positions them very well to capture digital-first and programmatic ad budgets. So I think they've been extremely strategic in those particular moves, and I would give them a 9. It would be a 10 if they were using a public ad server.
Well done. And very briefly, before I get on to Chris, what do you think, Microsoft? It's interesting for Microsoft. What do you think if you're Microsoft looking at this Netflix business? What would you predict in the future? What might happen there?
I'd be very happy. It's a tough question. I don't know the answer to that. I think Microsoft are extremely well placed to accelerate the go-to-market strategy for Netflix. Very good partnership. They've got deep-rooted relationships with agencies. They understand the programmatic ecosystem. They've got a legacy of harnessing data and technology to fuel yield for publishers. So I think it's a really strong relationship.
That's what's called a leading question. Chris, game changer, marks out of 10.
I mean, look, it's going to be super exciting for the CTV space. It's giving more visibility to this sector rather than it just being an add-on to the broadcast schedule. It's going to be seen as an equal standing if you look at the overall space. So it's exciting, but from a healthy competition perspective, I'm not going to be as optimistic as a 9. I'm going to go in with a 7.5 because there's two sides of the coin. But yeah, it's exciting, but it's and it's certainly for the space, but for the smaller publishers, it's a big giant coming into the space.
Yes. Dean, final word to you.
Yeah, it's another tick, right? I mean, as I picture myself flicking through my Samsung right now, plug not intended, I start to think about the different tiles that are there, and the more of them we can serve ads on and reach consumers as a brand, like that's super exciting, right? So I think it's maybe an 8, I guess. Like I think as we start to see more ad-funded models, I think that's a good thing for brands and for broadcasters. Maybe not so much for consumers, but.
My very adult mental maths tells me that's an average of 8 out of 10. So thank you very much. Thank you to the panel, and thank you in the audience, and enjoy lunch. Thank you very much.
Thank you.